Good evening, and thank you for coming to the April 17th, 2025 Select Board meeting. We are here to discuss 35 and 37 Interlaken Road, formerly known as DeSisto, or informally. Tonight, as we begin our meeting, we will hear from a representative from Beals Associates who did the peer review report, and it's dated April 4th, 2025. After completion of the presentation, the select board will have the opportunity to ask questions, get clarification. Once we exhaust all of our questions, the Attorney Silverstein and Jim Scalise will have a chance to give their presentation. We will then, the select board will ask questions. And when we are exhausted all of our questions, and if there's time allows, we don't know how long this will take, I will give public comment, 2 minutes for each person who wants to speak. And when I'm going to ask that comments be one at a time, you introduce yourself. We respectfully ask that the question, comment, concern is not redundant, is germane to the report, and we ask for civility. Please remember that all meetings have been recorded and all prior questions are documented on the tapes. So thank you for your cooperation. Thank you for coming. And then after comments, the select board have time to talk, and then we will make a meeting certain for the next time. So we'll get started. Michael will introduce the Beals associate presentation.
I don't know how to say Tim's last name, but I see you online, Tim.
How's it going? It's Tim Zerwinski.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us, and thank you for allowing us to participate remotely. Stockbridge is lovely, but it is a little bit of a hike from Boston, so we definitely appreciate the opportunity to remotely participate in this hearing. My name is Tim Zerwinski. I'm the Director of Land Planning for Beals Associates. Beals Associates is a planning and civil engineering firm based in Boston. We've been doing site planning, civil engineering, infrastructure planning since 1990. I have been with the firm relatively not as long as some of the principals. I just joined in December, but I have more than a decade of municipal planning experience. Former planning director for the town of Milton. Spent time in Milton, spent time in the nonprofit affordable housing development world, in development review for the Boston Planning and Development Agency. And so I serve again as the Director of Land Planning for Beals and Associates, working in our planning division. We were asked by the town to take a look at the special permit application for 35 Interlaken Road, and particularly to kind of look at the zoning, the cottage era estate adaptive reuse or rehabilitation zoning under which the special permit is being considered. To look at the criteria in the zoning, make some findings or some opinions on the findings that the select board needs to make in order to issue a special permit. Take a look at the traffic impact study, the stormwater management report, the civil and site plan submissions, and make some comments and kind of take a look and help the select board to look at that application and be able to make a judgment as to whether or not it complies with the zoning. So I'm going to start off, I think, with I don't have slides, but hopefully everyone has read our report. If you don't have it in front of you, it is posted. I saw it was posted on the project page's website, so that's great. I think a couple of high level issues both on the kind of planning and zoning aspect of the application and then the civil and site plan aspect of it is the completeness of the application and the there were some materials that we believe are missing and really crucial for the select board to make a fully informed judgment as to whether or not this project complies with zoning. I'll start with some really kind of brief and general comments on the stormwater and utilities review. I am not a civil engineer by training. We had some very experienced and very good civil engineers take a look at this application. They were not able to be here tonight, so I apologize for that. One thing that I will say is that something that we've done as a firm in the past in these reviews is avail ourselves for if it's the select board's prerogative to have a working session with the project engineers to kind of roll up our sleeves and kind of work through these comments if there are any kind of questions or kind of just work through potential solutions. I think the main issue that we identified with the stormwater report and the civil plans, and this connects back to the zoning, the special permit requirements in the Stockbridge zoning bylaw require that that all of these projects are compliant. Yes.
Tim, what page are you on in terms of the report? Because obviously the stormwater is not in the first section of the report.
Yeah, I'm kind of sort of in the introductory kind of section of it.
Okay. All right.
I'll get to some of the bullet points next. I did want to kind of get through some of the stormwater stuff because I frankly have the least to say about that right now.
Okay.
So I just wanted to kind of put it on the table that a lot of these are highly technical issues that hopefully the engineers understand and get. But I think as a general principle, we are perfectly willing and happy to work directly with the project's engineers if they have specific questions, if they have issues with some of our comments, to kind of bring the project up to a level where we feel confident signing off on it. Especially as it relates to compliance with the Massachusetts Stormwater Handbook and the stormwater guidelines that the Commonwealth has.
Do you want to address that right now? He's asking for permission to talk directly with the engineers.
I thought we would just hear all of what he had to say and then break it down.
I'll keep a running list then. All right.
Yeah, and like I said, that's something we've done in the past. It's obviously something that is your decision to make or not make. I just wanted to kind of put that on the table. And this is something, and I looking at some of the other materials and some of the other hearings that have been heard on this application, as it relates to the completeness of the stormwater report and the civil engineering plans. The special permit requirements, and this is in section 6.3, which every special permit, including the cottage era zoning, everything has to comply with 6.3. And one of the requirements under the site plan section in 6.38, this is 6.38A, basically says the plan shall show compliance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Stormwater Management Policy. Yeah, that might be way down there. And I think by the applicant's own admission, the plans are about 75% complete, which I think is something that is probably, it's not, I wouldn't say it's inappropriate. This is something that we definitely understand that at the kind of permitting level, you may not have construction ready documents. Few projects will. But that is something that is an element of your zoning, that everything has to, demonstrate compliance with the Massachusetts stormwater policies. And, without having a complete stormwater report, without having a complete set of civil plans, we can't say that is compliant. So the one kind of overarching general comment that I would probably make about this is if this is something that the select board finds to be acceptable, which is again perfectly within your prerogative to do, would be to condition any approval on, you know, a fully worked up set of civil engineering plans, a fully worked up stormwater report. It kind of sometimes it goes without saying, but this is something that the zoning requires it to be done, you know, if an approval is to be made. And so you're going to want to be explicit about that condition. And so that's kind of my overarching comment on the stormwater and utilities issues. I think if the applicant has any specific questions or issues, you know, I'm definitely happy to bring those back to the office so that our engineers can take a look at them. Or again, if the select board would assent to it, to have a you know, a working session with the project engineers to kind of work through all these issues together. And that's something where, you know, we've seen, you know, a member of the select board kind of participate in that meeting, you know, to keep an eye on things, you know, if that's something that you're interested in. So that's what I've got on stormwater. Again, if the applicant or the board have specific questions, I'll do my best. I don't want to get too far over my skis, but we can definitely take those questions back to the office, and have our engineers consider them. What I can speak to with a little bit more authority is a kind of a section by section review of the cottage era estate adaptive reuse zoning, and then subsequently the general special permit zoning. And the way that we conducted this review was again to kind of break down every element of those bylaws and basically, you know, render an opinion, you know, does the project comply with this section or not? Um, and you know, it's a pretty lengthy review. A significant number of the comments are just acknowledgements that, you know, the project complies here. So you know, you're all set. But I think again, as and I'll speak to the sort of the what do we call it? The primary issues bullets that are above this section right here. Um, because again, some of the overarching issues with the application are relative to the completeness in terms of the submission of materials and drawings. This first bullet about relief under subsection 6.1.2, which is kind of the third element of the zoning bylaw that's an element of this application, and this is relative to the extension of a non-conforming structure, use, or lot. The primary structure on the property is non-conforming, particularly for height. It's according to the applicant's drawings, it's approximately 40 feet tall. The zoning height in this district is 35 feet. And so they seek relief via a kind of a separate but parallel special permit for relief of extension of a non-conforming structure, you know, particularly the principal building under section 6.1.2. And this, I think, is related to, I know you have had a kind of a lengthy conversation about section 6.6.4.j, which is about, you know, new buildings within 200 feet of the principal building. These two sections are related, because in order for there to be a special permit issued under 6.1.2, you have to be able to confidently judge that those are extensions of the non-conforming use and not new buildings altogether. And, you know, where we came down on that is, you know, and again, understanding the discussion that's happened before about sort of the nature of the connection between the primary structure and those two buildings. I think they're B and E on either side of the primary structure. The nature of that connection is crucial to determining whether or not those two buildings can be considered additions or if they're, you know, new independent detached structures. And so, you know, at a very fundamental level, we kind of need to see what those connections look like outside of the plan view that we have on the site plans. You know, where you can see the footprint of the buildings and then the sort of the thin footprint of the connections between the two. I think, understanding the applicant's contention that these are enclosed, conditioned, these are not just kind of open arcades. These are enclosed hallways that are, closed to the elements. I think we need to see what that looks like in an elevation view. We need to see what that looks like in relation to how the new building connects to the existing primary structure. Is that connection 1 story? Is it 2 stories? Is it 3 stories? Does it read as 1 building, or does it read as 3 buildings connected by kind of narrow breezeways? And so, without making a judgment on that, we kind of need to see what that looks like. We have elevation views of all of the buildings, and we have plan views of all the buildings, but we don't have an elevation view of those connections. We don't have a clear articulation of the materials used in those connections. And so we believe that that's kind of critical information for the select board to be able to use to make a judgment, as to whether those are additions or whether those are detached structures. This is, I'm sorry, was there a question there?
Specific to this issue, can we ask a question now?
If it's okay with the presenter.
Okay,
No, absolutely, 100%.
so, the question I have is, what types of connections, in your opinion, would qualify as a single building versus what type of connections would not? It might be helpful to have clarity, going into this process of, kind of this fundamental issue. I had thought in the last meeting that the recommendation from not recommendation, but the analysis by our town council was that we had flexibility on this issue. If it's your opinion that different designs of the connections would impact the determination whether it was a single building or multiple buildings, it might be helpful to hear more about that right now. I don't know,
Yeah, and I think there's, it's kind of, I don't want to kind of pass the buck too much, although you all are ultimately the deciders, but my job is to give you as much information and as much opinion and recommendation as you think might be useful. And what I would say is I think there's what we try to find a good kind of working definition of what would constitute, quote unquote addition. There is no definition in the zoning bylaw. That would have been, great. That would have been pretty ironclad. The guidance in the state building code is really not helpful for this particular question. And so it really does come down to opinion, frankly. And so what I'll say is there's probably a spectrum of, yeah, this is very clearly an addition on one end of the spectrum, and then this is obviously a detached structure on the other end of the spectrum. And I think we make a comment later on that it would be if those buildings were connected directly to the rear of the primary structure, there's no question that those could be considered additions. They could be really big additions, but they're additions. I think that absent that, when I kind of talk about a spectrum, I think a connection that is, that spans the full height of both structures, so that there's not a kind of a break in the roof line, for instance, between the primary structure and the additional structure. If that connection is a kind of a 1-story enclosed breezeway, I think that reads architecturally and visually as less of an addition and more of this is a separate building attached by a breezeway.
But Tim, but it sounds like what you're saying though is that in either extreme that you just outlined, it's still a matter of opinion because there's not really case law or any legal structure to determine this. I mean, I understand the two ends of the extreme, but I don't know that this is, other than, I don't know that there's a lot of clarity in what you're suggesting I don't know what the course action is, I guess, either from the point of view of the applicant or from the point of view of this board, if it's a matter of opinion.
Yeah, I'm not trying to dance around the issue. I really do wish that there was more kind of authority behind this. But again, absent a definition in the bylaw, absent a definition in the state building code, it kind of really, what I would say is, the purpose of all of this, whether it's section 6.1.2 or the actual cottage era estate bylaw, the whole point of all of this is we're trying to preserve and enhance and kind of not detract from a traditional historic architectural kind of treatment of these buildings. And so, it is a decision. It's a tough one. But also you kind of have to fall back on, what is the point of all of this? And what the point of all of it, in my opinion, is we want to have structures that are consistent, harmonious, and kind of contributing to the architectural heritage that we're trying to preserve in the primary building. And so, that's kind of, unfortunately, that's the best that we can do. But I think, those additional kind of materials in terms of the drawings of, what does this thing actually look like? Is kind of critical for you to be able to make that judgment. And it's because, I know there's been case law around, what's an addition, what's not an addition. It wasn't, super black and white in my read of kind of some of the discussion at your previous hearing. But again, I think understanding the materials, understanding the kind of the size and the nature of the connection will go a long way to helping you make that determination. And frankly, again, leaning on the purpose of the bylaw, puts you on your strongest footing. That like this is consistent with with the preservation and the enhancement of the architectural heritage, of the site. So I think that's a big one. And again, it kind of is connected to a discussion that you've already had. The other element of that part of the bylaw 6.1.2 is the additional structures that are kind of the ones that are not considered to be the additions. And our read of the application is that those two buildings closest to the primary structure, B and E, are the ones that are kind of considered to be the additions. The cottage era estate bylaw allows for additional detached structures. There's no limit on them. You can put as many as are consistent with some of the other dimensional requirements. But they do need to be the zoning height of 35 feet. There's no provision for additional height under the cottage era estate bylaw. And so it's not 100% clear to us that the select board has the discretion to grant relief under 6.1.2 about the extension of nonconformities to new structures. And so if those additional detached structures are going to be 40 feet, I don't know that that's relief that the select board can grant. There may be a wider view of 6.1.2 related to, we're kind of changing the use of the property, and this is, part of the use is having these buildings. And I definitely appreciate the argument that nothing is taller than the primary structure, and the site is designed and landscaped in a way to kind of screen those additional structures. So, from a site design perspective, I think it does the trick. It's just a question of does that extension of nonconformity extend to those detached structures? I'm not sure that it does. But again, this is a case for the applicant to make, now that they kind of see what our opinion on that matter is.
And is it clear, and this is as much a question for you as for Jonathan and Chris, the lawyers, for both the town and the applicant in reverse order. The question is, to get to 35 feet, the obvious solution is you take out the parking in the basement of the unit. And if you want to do that, that's great, but that means more impervious surface and more parking spaces in the rest of the unit. So, I guess I'm wondering can we consider the structures at 35 feet, without considering the parking? And part of the context of that question is simply, there's a lot of density already down on the plain, as I call it. And the reason for that is because I think it's important that the town preserve as open space the area behind the wetland and up on the mountain. And so, by removing the height limit, you increase the pressure of density to make the project work in the part where the project is built. And I guess I'd like to know if this is, look at if council tells us, our council tells us we can't consider 40 feet, I'm of course going to respect that, but I want to be cautious that everything is a trade-off here. Everything is a trade-off that we're going to have to take a look at.
Yeah, I think that's and I'm glad you bring that up. Because that's the name of the game in all of these discussions around these types of projects where, the purpose of the bylaw is the preservation of not just the architecture, but of the views and of the site itself. And I think that the application does quite a good job, especially, relative to the previous, materials of preserving a significant amount of open space. But as you say, the trade-off is you've got a relatively tightly densified kind of portion, a little bit closer to the road. I mean, you can't do anything on the mountain, which is good. You can't do anything in the wetland, and some of the upland area on the other side of the wetland is still, relatively preserved, which I think is positive.
But I don't think it's Tim, I don't think it's by the road, actually. Part of the bylaw, the clear purpose of the bylaw is to protect the front yard and the viewscape from the road. And in fact, I think pushback or at least feedback we gave in the first couple of meetings was that the parking in the front yard was perhaps not optimal. And once again, going back to the 40 feet, if you don't want to have parking in the front yard, and yet you're removing the parking from underneath the buildings, what's going to give here? Do we end up giving up the front yard? What's more important? I think that everyone needs to understand that these decisions are going to have trade-offs.
No, I think that's the right way to think about it. And I think you're absolutely right. I'm gonna keep going, and we can kind of go back to things if we need to. The next kind of general comment again is about, and I alluded to it, previously, elevation diagrams of those connections, information about the materials. We know what the buildings are going to look like, but is it cedar clapboard? Is it hardy plank? What are the materials that that the windows are made out of? These are all kind of important questions. These are requirements of the zoning to kind of walk through what the materials are going to be. It's really important, again, because the purpose of the bylaw is the preservation of the architecture and of the views, and of the landscape. We think that a kind of a rendering at street level, especially from Interlake and Road, because the thing about the site, which you all are obviously much more familiar of than I am, but the house is set back a good distance from the road. And so your experience of the site from the public domain is in a significant portion that lawn and kind of what's around it, and then what's behind the building in terms of the elevation that goes in the back. And so seeing the project in some type of a rendering or a drawing from that perspective, again, will go a long way towards, it's one thing to look at these elevation diagrams. And the thing to understand about elevation diagrams is these are abstractions. You'll never see the building in that way, because you just don't have the peripheral vision to do it.
And Tim, there were a number of significant architectural details. This is for the applicant too. Maybe when it's your turn, you're going to address this. There were a number of significant architectural details on the left side, if you're looking from the road, of the property in the lawn, having to do with where folks got married and a special garden. And it seems like there are some elements of that left around sort of the, it was an area of trees and landscape design that was really central to the original design of the property. Is any of that maintained, do you know of, in this proposal?
I would defer to the applicant on that.
Okay.
You know, again, I'm seeing all of this in kind of plan view. We have I haven't visited the site, but my boss has. He took a trip out to Stockbridge a few weeks ago to take a look. So I would defer to the applicant on that question.
All right. I'm talking about the alley, sort of alley with an E, you know?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
All right.
And so yeah, so some of those additional kind of drawings, you know, we believe would go a long way. You know, moving on to the next kind of general comment, section 6.6 allows and this is relative to, you know, what is a hotel residence, you know, which is a significant number of the hotel units in the project are defined as that that hotel residence style of unit. And there's a more detailed comment later on, but I think you know, the applicant should speak to what is the distinction between that and a multifamily use. You know, one of which is allowed under the cottage era estate zoning, one of which is not allowed. And so, you know, being very clear on kind of what makes this a hotel and not a multifamily building is going to be important. And that could be operational details, programmatic details, you know, maybe things that are not necessarily inherent to the design of the building, but are more, you know, relative to how the building operates. And that's going to be important information for the select board to adequately condition a project to make sure that that those units are kind of what the zoning allows. This next comment, and I think this may just be a function of a version that of the application that we got and that is posted on the select board's page. Because I've seen in presentations that the applicant has given that they have stamped plans. The application that's posted and that we were given doesn't have stamps. So hopefully this is just something that we can kind of just address and kind of be done with. But those site plans need to be stamped by a professional engineer or a registered landscape architect. And again, this following you know, this following comment again is about the completeness of the application relative to the Commonwealth stormwater management policies. If this is something that the applicant and the select board have kind of discussed and agreed to beforehand, that's fine. We just want to make sure that the select board, you know, you have your eyes wide open in terms of conditioning any approval on complete plans, complete stormwater report, complete compliance with the stormwater policies. So those are kind of the
Tim,
main.
one last question
Yes.
on that point. You know, if we condition it based on compliance, who enforces that compliance? Would it be our building inspector? This question maybe for Michael too. I mean, who, you know, if you leave it open-ended like that, what is the mechanism to enforce that compliance?
You know, we've seen in the past, you know, sign off by the town engineer or the DPW director. You know, sometimes if there are conservation issues, you know, approval by the Conservation Commission is kind of the stand-in for that. You know, I wouldn't say, you know, trust us to give you the thumbs up. You could. I mean, the select board is the ultimate authority here. And so, you know, I would consult with town council about what you think the best, you know, the best option is, because, you know, one thing that we're not interested in doing here is, you know, this project getting tripped up on some of these kind of, they're important, but they are kind of technical, black and white, you know, compliance issues. And so, you know, we definitely understand the applicant's position that, you know, we're kind of 75% of the way there. You know, we didn't want to kind of get 100% because we know the project could change, which, you know, it may have changed, you know, as of this hearing. You know, we definitely understand that. But, the zoning requires there to be a complete stormwater plan. And we just want to make sure that, before, a shovel hits the ground, that, that has happened. And so, town engineer, DPW director, Conservation Commission, there's multiple.
What about a clerk of the works type position that would basically maybe be a kind of a ombudsman for the town, if you will, that we were to appoint? I mean, I don't know that we want to have a volunteer regulatory board, I mean, this is going to take professional engineering skills that are, certainly if I wouldn't want to be on a board kind of approving whether or not they met the stormwater, requirements. I mean, I think we're going to need a little bit more than, and we don't have a town engineer.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that's right. But he could do the conservation, Michael, but maybe not the engineering part, could he? I mean, I'm just saying perhaps a clerk of the works might make sense.
But
Anyway,
Tim, wouldn't we wait to do the stormwater calculations until the completed project so we know exactly what buildings and plantings and if in fact it goes all the way through? Because it seems imprudent to take all that time, energy, and to calculate something that could change or be shifted, or a building could be deleted.
Yeah, we hear that. And this is one of those things where, when you're writing, and I'm saying I'm using, whenever the zoning was written, the town has an interest in, we want projects to comply. It's important. We're going to put it in our zoning, black and white, where that meets up with how projects actually get designed and approved. It starts to get a little bit grayer and muddier, which is where we find ourselves, where, we're at a point where the drawings are almost there. They're not 100% there. And so how do we kind of navigate that last kind of portion of getting to a final design, staying consistent with the zoning? So yes, we definitely appreciate the point that, you wouldn't want to go through all the effort and then the project changes and then you got to go back to the drawing board. We get that. It's just a matter, as the permit granting authority, just making sure that you maintain as much of your control over this, and not approve a project and then the stormwater plan doesn't work because, the plan didn't get finished, before it was approved. So this is something, I can take this back to the principals at Beals and kind of see, we've worked in big towns, we worked in small towns. We've worked on all sorts of different projects. So we can provide some advice as to, what the best type of condition, in an eventual approval, if that does happen. And the applicant may have some opinions on that as well, which would be good to hear.
Well, could we, if we do approve the project, put a condition on, once it's approved, that this stormwater plan is presented to our satisfaction, or it doesn't go through?
Yeah, I think that, we've seen that before with other elements of because when you've got a project of this size and scale, there are multiple, points, where, you need to go through the town. You don't get a building permit, you don't get a demo permit, until you demonstrate X, Y, and Z has been completed. If there are bonding requirements, that's frequently a condition of receiving a building permit. Occupancy permits, can be tied to certain performance measures, based on testing and whatnot. So I think there are a lot of different options. We can definitely kind of provide some advice on that. Town council, may have some opinions. The applicant may have some opinions. We just want to raise the issue of, these plans are not 100% there. They need to be before the project gets built, or else we're all in trouble. So we're kind of done with the general issues. There are, a number more planning and zoning comments. I don't want to go through all of them. I will if you do, if you want me to. But there are a few, especially these kind of general comments, that I think, starting with comment 1, going through, comment 6, these are things that are kind of, again, general, not tied to any specific, requirement, because we did go through section by section, subsection by subsection, to take a look and kind of make sure they were compliant. But I think this first general planning and zoning comment, again, is relative to the purpose of the bylaw in terms of preservation of the principal building, preservation of the grounds, preservation of the views. We have no reason to doubt the findings in the structural report that the applicant provided, where they went into the building and took a look and kind of made some determinations about what could be preserved, what couldn't be preserved. We don't disbelieve any of that. And so when the applicant says that we're going to do our best, we're definitely going to do the facade. We're going to try our best elsewhere, but we can only really promise the facade. I don't think we want to get into a back and forth about, well, what about this side? We think it could be okay. What I think we do recommend is some additional conditions about, and again, this is up to the select board to determine, what is important to you in terms of preservation. Is it materials? Is it architectural forms? Is it, you could condition an approval on a kind of a more detailed cataloging of, here's the condition of the siding, here's the condition of the soffits, here's the condition of the of the roof line, and kind of while the demolition project is going on, being required to kind of take a really close look at these materials and kind of see what can be saved and not saved, we think would be appropriate, because again, the point of this bylaw is the preservation of that building. And so, yes.
Yeah, we clearly agree with that. So I have a question on other similar projects to this, because what I struggle with a little bit is, this is a parcel that by right, you can build 62 units. We had a consultant several years ago looking at open space, planning, and they determined that 62 units can be built by right. All right. Now, the bonus here is in both additional units and in additional uses. And obviously, if you're saving the whole building, it seems to me you're getting a bonus for the preservation. So the question I have is how do we come up with a financial model of what's a fair bonus based on either, is it the cost, is it the time, is it the effort? Like what's the how do people calculate, the trade-offs between, if it's 20 million to save the whole building and 2 million to save the facade, it would seem like the level of the bonus differs depending upon the amount of money you got to spend to accomplish the goal. And I guess I wouldn't mind a little bit of guidance around, kind of how we have that conversation with the applicant.
Yeah. So there's ways to think about this. And again, I would ask the board to kind of think critically about, what is important to you and what is important to the town. I don't want to kind of, betray too much of a developer kind of bias here, but I was in a public meeting years ago, when I was in the city of Boston, and this kind of conversation came up about, the amount of money that the developer was going to make on this project, et cetera, et cetera. And someone in the crowd was like, let's not count the money in someone else's pocket. Let's look at what is important to us as a community, and are we getting it or not getting it? And so, thinking about it from a financial term in terms of, what is the value of this density bonus that we're giving, or this use bonus that we're giving? I would, you'd have to get a different type of consultant to do that. I don't,
Okay.
And again, this is my opinion. You can all kind of disagree. I don't think that that's the important thing here. I think the important thing is you have a site that is a lovely site. The building, as kind of derelict as it is right now, has a long history. It can be a beautiful building. The site is gorgeous. You know, the view up into the mountains is one of a kind. And so what you're looking for is a 62 unit subdivision where we're going to blast a road up that hill and knock down this building and tear down every tree, or a more site sensitive project that, you know, is going to have some denser buildings and some different types of uses. But look at what we get. You know, we get a nice shiny restored building. We get, you know, something that is not going to blow up the view shed. And so I think, you know, again, thinking of it in financial terms, maybe not the best way. And again, this harkens back to needing to see what the project looks like at the ground level in a kind of real non-abstract way, you know, to give you the tools, because ultimately, you know, if and when this project gets built, you know, it's the owner that has to deal with running a resort or a hotel or whatever. What your and the people of Stockbridge, what your interaction with this site is going to be is from the street. And does the
But Tim,
ultimate
I'm not concerned with the developer making money. I in fact hope he does, because the last thing we want is a half-finished project
Right.
where someone runs out of money. So, you know, the fact is that the project being profitable is actually really important to the conditioning of the project. Let's
Right.
face it, that wasn't really a question I was asking, but you do bring up a good point. There are other considerations such as you know, the more protected the view is from the front and the more protected the land is from the back, would suggest the more that we're able to consider those bonuses in the part that is being developed.
Yeah, and I think, you know, looking at it in plan view, looking at it, you know, in a rendering from street view, you know, is what is it going to take for us to get the nicest looking project possible? You know, and so I think, you know, the applicant obviously has opinions on that. But I think, you know, as it relates to, you know, the preservation of the building, you know, you want to preserve as much as possible because that's the point of the bylaw. And that's what gets the applicant all of those buildings in the back is the preservation of the building in the front and the preservation of the lawn and the view sheds.
Right.
And so I think, you know, again, you know, we kind of make, you know, a comment and, you know, I don't want to be in the business of kind of, you know, designing and redesigning sites for applicants. That's not our job. It's not what our scope of work was. But again, if the point is to preserve the front, you know, you've got to preserve the front. And so, you know, we talk about, you know, does there need to be so much parking and event space in the front? You know, can the driveway go around the back? Is there a way to kind of, you know, the vast majority of the front lawn is preserved, but, you know, there are critical pieces where there are, you know, potentially highly intensive uses going on there. And so I think, you know, when you talk about trade-offs, you know, it would be great to preserve the whole building. If you can only preserve the facade, well, that makes it even more important that other elements of the site are preserved so that, you know, we are kind of maintaining a historical kind of heritage, you know, for this site. So, you know, again, we make some comments about some potential changes. You know, we understand that those are potentially big changes, you know, for the site. We understand if it just doesn't work. We get it, but we did want to put those out there as just an example of, you know, this is how you could design a site that did maximum preservation. You know, if that works for this applicant, wonderful. If it doesn't, then we need to work on, you know, again, what are those trade-offs and kind of, you know, the arguments, you know, in favor of, you know, we need to have the site be a certain way. There's a bit in comment too about parking and I did get a preview of some of the materials. I don't want to steal the applicant's thunder. I know that they've been looking at this report and they've been working on their site plan.
But before you go to comment two, there's 6 bullets in comment 1 that you know, I think the applicant should be prepared to respond to, which is, you know, which is kind of maintaining the front, the driveway, the wooden fence, obviously you're already working on the grass and gravel parking space in the front. the question of running the driveway between the north and south gate roads, which I think was more traditional to how the property was laid out. I'm not sure I would agree with the connecting buildings at B and E, or, yeah, we'll have to talk about that one. But I do think eliminating the fence in the front lawn, something that, those kind of maintaining the traditional landscape and look of the front lawn, I think are, at least 4 of those 6 points are worth talking about when you guys get up. All right.
The comment too about kind of general site-wide parking. The bylaw has minimum parking requirements for certain uses. It doesn't have parking requirements for some of the uses that are proposed and are consistent or allowed uses under the cottage era estate bylaw. And so what the applicant does is, use the Institute for Transportation Engineers guide for different land uses for parking requirements, which is appropriate. But there is a little bit of over parking going on the site plan, and I think just generally the less impervious surface, the better. And that means less parking. We understand that Stockbridge is not necessarily a transit-oriented town. If you're going to get to this site, you're going to be driving. We get it. But there's an interest in preserving open space, grass, trees, pervious surfaces. And so anything that can be done to, make the parking more efficient, whether it's through shared parking, we mentioned allowing kind of on street, to the extent that the driveway is a street, curbside parking, to kind of achieve some of those numbers. Again, just to not overpark a project, let's be very, very deliberate about the number of parking spaces that we have. Again, because the open space and the pervious surface is really critical. Comment 3 is about the workforce housing units, which we believe are a really good addition. We think the town should encourage that sort of thing. But once you get into subsidized deed restricted housing, you get just a boatload of requirements, from the Commonwealth. Was there a question there?
I have one, but I want to hear your comments on 3 before I weigh in.
So, workforce housing doesn't have a lot of this stuff comes out of 40B and the 40B guidelines. People think of 40B as kind of big 40B projects, but 40B kind of governs a lot of subsidized housing inventory, local initiative programs, and local initiative program means if the town has some type of inclusionary zoning requirement where you're required to do affordable units as a part of a special permit application, that goes through the 40B regulations. There's no formal definition of workforce housing. Mass Housing, which is a kind of quasi-public finance agency, has a definition that they use that, between 60% and 120% of area median income. Affordable housing generally works by kind of pegging eligibility to a certain income level. I think folks are familiar with this idea. We're just going to need more details on what the proposal is. Not that, we would say, it should be this specific, income level. It's up to the town to figure out what your needs are. You know those better than I do. But you do need to specify that. And then there are other requirements around marketing the units, affirmative fair housing, marketing plan. There's got to be a lottery that's run by a certified lottery agent. How are the units going to be monitored, in perpetuity? Are they going to be for sale units? Are they going to be rental units? These are all details that you need, before, before these things actually get built. The other thing as it relates to the location and the sort of the building type of the affordable, I use the term affordable, deed restricted, subsidized, whatever definition you want to use, is, the regulations want these units to be dispersed throughout the project. They don't want to be, here's the affordable section of the site. And that's both in terms of location and in terms of building type and kind of internal fixtures. So, if you've got granite countertops in every unit, The affordable units have granite countertops. You know, and so there are a couple issues here where, you know, there's only 4 units, you know, which again is fine. But they're all relatively in the same place on the site, and they are a different housing type than the rest of the housing types.
Right. And Tim, I think that brings up a great point, which is, look, I get, first of all, the applicant is under no obligation to follow our residential inclusionary bylaw because for legal reason I'll get into, but he's not. So the fact that there's any units there is great. Having said that, you know, with 145 really high-end luxury units and then 4 duplexes kind of glommed onto the edge of the property, I worry a little bit that the kind of working class workforce units are going to feel a little out of place and going to stick out a little bit and not really feel integrated into the rest of the property. And there's an easy way to solve that, which is, you know, you could, you know, let's say in those two footprints, you maybe do 2 additional luxury units, and rather than spend the money to put 4 units where they might not be, you know, integrated into the rest of the building, simply pay into the Affordable Housing Trust and let us figure out how to follow all the law around building housing elsewhere in town that would make sense of that. You know, it's got to be pretty expensive to build those 4 units, and if there was offsetting revenue because you just built 2 more luxury units. It'd be one thing if 20, 10, 30% of the units were going to be workforce or affordable. It's not the case here, and I just worry a little bit about, you know, being on the edge of the property and kind of the subsidized section, you know? So
Yeah.
it's a thought. We can't tell you to do that, but I think that might be a more successful for the purpose of what you're trying to do, which is to sort of make sure that some folks can afford to live and work in Stockbridge. It might be easier to accomplish that and no more expensive to think about an alternative to what is laid out in this plan.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And honestly, like, you know, it's if it's not a requirement, there's no sense in kind of, you know, turning yourself into a pretzel trying to accommodate something, you know, that doesn't work, you know, on the site plan. And so, and again, all of this is kind of, you know, if you want those units to count on your subsidized housing inventory, you got to follow all the rules, or else, you know, create a kind of separate bespoke kind of system, which I don't think I wouldn't be terribly interested in that, you know, just because the monitoring and compliance on that would be, you know, a nightmare. So I think it's a good point, and I think it's something that the applicant should definitely consider. You know, just noting that there's some work in the 100-foot buffer. You know, so you know, that's something that the Conservation Commission is going to need to weigh in on. No work is proposed in the scenic mountain area, which is good. We don't have to worry about that. And again, this sounds like a kind of a ticky-tack kind of issue, but because the landscaping of the site is critical, it's totally fine to show mature plantings on a site plan. It would look. Someone getting a call?
Keep going.
We're getting
Anyway, go ahead.
It wasn't for one of us.
Yeah, no, I don't want to call anyone. It affects the microphone on the Zoom, so I can't
Okay.
talk if the phone's ringing. But you know, because and it's totally fine to show the mature plantings. It would look funny if you didn't. But at the same time, understand that the site is not going to look exactly like it looks like on the plan on day one. And so what we've seen done, you know, oftentimes is to ensure that, you know, all of these trees and shrubs, which in addition to having an aesthetic purpose, are serving, you know, a stormwater purpose, they're serving a screening purpose. We want these plantings to survive. We want them to kind of grow and be mature and kind of serve the purpose that they're ultimately going to serve for the long life of this project. You know, considering some condition around, you know, ongoing monitoring of those plantings in the first 2 or 3 kind of growing seasons to make sure that, they're not dying off. Once you get past year 2 or 3, and a landscape architect can tell you, exactly kind of what the best, timeline would be. You start to, basic maintenance kind of, but those first couple years are critical. And so you may consider conditioning the approval on a kind of ongoing monitoring scheme, to replace any failed plantings, to make sure that you don't have any gaps, in your landscaping. So again, we're into some of the kind of blow by blow, requirements under the zoning. I may skip down to comment number 10.
Or can we just comment on the plantings? I
Oh,
think
yeah, no, go for it.
I think that I had a conversation with somebody who's doing work for us on Main Street, a guy named Kieran Yapel. Many of you may know that family from they used to own Race Mountain and, tree service. And he was explaining that to focus on noise and light reduction, that often there's significant overplanting in the first 7 years and then a thinning once the trees start to get to maturity. And I think that this is sort of like, if we're going to do something here, it is absolutely critical that we adequately screen for noise and for light. And so really kind of drilling down and having the expertise, give both the applicant and the board comfort that we've got a plan such as a professional forester like that. They actually have ways to accomplish this. And it's something I would like a conversation on. That would be, one of the, as we sequence, if we're going to do anything, as we sequence it, really thinking that through first before we start doing the other things. It helps protect for noise and for light pollution. So, width of the width and density of the plantings.
No, I think that's definitely appropriate, and it's a good conversation to have, because again, it doesn't, and again, this site plan, it's very nice looking. And so, the eventual owner and operator of this facility, is going to have an interest in their site looking nice. So I think there's a kind of self-reinforcing aspect to this, but again, the town has interest in, lighting and screening and other things that maybe are not, 100% lined up with what the operator's kind of expectations and priorities are. And so again, just making sure that, you have coverage in terms of what is meant to be accomplished by the special permit is going to be important.
Right, but the larger point, Tim, is that, and just so people have to understand, I think it's point H in 6.6, explicitly allows resorts. This board can't deny based on not wanting a resort. So what
Right.
the screening potentially does is it helps offset some of the potential, events and resort impacts on the neighbors. And, I think that people have to recognize that we have a specific set of laws that govern what we are not allowed to do. My opinion on whether we should have a resort in town, I didn't write the cottage yard bylaw. It is what it is, and it's in writing now. So, I'd like to make sure that there's a heavy focus if there is event space and resort type of stuff, that we start from the get-go and making sure that we do as much as we can so that it isn't a burden on the neighbors,
No, absolutely. So I think comment number 10 kind of harkens back to one of the general comments that we made up top. And that's relative to the hotel residence units. And I think, again, it just all comes down to, more information about what is meant by hotel residence, because it's not a use in the zoning. The zoning does define, it defines dwelling unit in its definitions. It defines multifamily dwelling. It defines hotel. There's no definition for hotel residence. Now, it's going to be incumbent on the applicant to kind of discuss the programmatic and operational characteristics of the hotel residence, because strictly from a design perspective, a hotel room can have, it can have a kitchen, just like an apartment. It can have extended stay. How long do you have to stay in a hotel room before it's an apartment? So there's nothing that kind of just by looking at the plan, you can say, well, that's clearly an apartment. That's not a hotel room. And so I think it's going to be important for the applicant to very distinctly define what they mean by hotel residence. And again, make that distinction from hotel residence is not a multifamily residence for these reasons. Because again, hotel is an allowed use, resort is an allowed use, multifamily is not an allowed use under the zoning. And so, just by looking at these building floor plans, they're fine as hotel rooms, but if they were multifamily, they would not be fine. And so that's just more information from the applicant, that we need in order to make sure that that particular use is consistent with the uses that are outlined in 6.6. I think the next probably major comment would be 15. And this is relative to again, another kind of piece of information that we need. One of the requirements is that you can't have additional buildings that have a greater floor area than the principal structure. And we don't have from the application, we don't have a tabulation of the gross floor area of these new buildings. We kind of did a calculation using some software and doing some math, to kind of get ballpark numbers. I'm not going to stake our reputation on these numbers, but just as kind of a general, here's what it kind of looks like, and we have those in those bullets. And so I think it's up to the applicant to provide a accurate, tabulation, using their kind of detailed building plans and their software to demonstrate that they are, consistent with that requirement in 6.6.3D, which says, and I just pulled it out. Yeah, no special permit issued pursuant to this section may authorize an addition or new structure that contains a gross floor area larger than that of the principal structure. So we need to know exactly how big the principal structure is, and we need to know exactly how big the other buildings are, because none of those other buildings can be larger than the principal structure. So that was 15. I all of these comments, obviously are kind of important to look through, but I think again, the ones that, harken back to what we consider to be the biggest kind of fundamental issues, with the application, I would go down to comment number 23. The special permit requirements, require every project, any applicable element of the bylaw, the project needs to be compliant with. And so off-street parking, driveways, circulation, section 6.16.1B here limits driveways to 500 feet. Whether North and South Gate roads, I don't know if those are streets or if they're considered driveways. Even if you were to say these are existing and they're streets, the additional kind of connections throughout the site exceed 500 feet. You're allowed to do that, and the bylaw gives the select board the ability to issue a special permit for relief from this. We would just recommend that the applicant, explicitly request that relief. You can talk to town council about this. They may be of the opinion that, this special permit kind of counts. You don't have to kind of issue a separate one. But again, just trying to be explicit around, you're allowed to do this, but we've got to give you relief explicitly for it. We don't want these things to kind of slip through the cracks. We want to make sure that you're writing a decision that is, authoritative and doesn't have any loose ends in it. And again, so those are the, the comments, up to comment number 23 are our kind of, again, blow by blow look at the cottage era estate bylaw. Now, within the cottage era estate bylaw is a requirement that you need to also be compliant with the general special permit requirements in section 6.3. So sort of we go, backwards in the bylaw to section 6.3 to look through to look through those requirements. And in comment number 25, again, and this is not unique to Stockbridge. We see these types of things in every kind of special permit bylaw. It's the ultimate discretion over, significant public benefits, desirable, not detrimental to the established or future character of the neighborhood. These are subjective judgments that, they're findings that the permit granting authority needs to make. You know, we think that the application identifies a number of benefits to the town that this project would bring. We think that the general idea of this type of project on this particular site makes a certain amount of sense. But again, ultimately, this is a Stockbridge unique, perspective, set of questions. And so, we just wanted to highlight that, please don't ask us if this is detrimental to the neighborhood. That's up to you all to figure out. But there are certain objective things, and obviously there are objective standards, in the stormwater requirements, obviously, and there are kind of black and white things in the zoning. So, we'll obviously, we've provided, opinions on those, but, this is one where this is really kind of fundamental to your decision-making authority. Comment number 26 is about the and I'm trying to pull my copy of the zoning out so that I have it right in front of me. 6.3.6D, which is the will not create undue traffic congestion or unduly impair pedestrian safety. So there are no sidewalks on Interlaken Road. So for better or for worse, that's that. There are sidewalks provided within the site, between the hotel buildings, restaurant, parking area. The single family houses are not connected by sidewalk to some of the other programmatic areas of the site. If that's intentional, so be it. But we always try to err on the side of connectivity within these sites, so that people that live there can avail themselves of some of the amenities on site without having to walk in the middle of the street. With the traffic impact analysis, we found, and there may be a more specific comment elsewhere about this, but I'll talk about it here. We did find that the traffic impact analysis was done according to MassDOT standards, which is usually the primary question. The state has regulations and standards around how these studies are conducted. They were conducted according to those standards. The findings of the traffic impact analysis, in our view, did not show significant impacts on the three metrics that are measured, which is level of service, capacity ratio, or volume to capacity ratio of the roadway, and level of delay. There's a breakdown in the traffic impact analysis. Obviously putting more cars on the road does impact those conditions. But what the finding is that it's not a significant impact, except in the Saturday peak hour condition. And that's the only time period, and the way that these things are measured is at intersections, because that's kind of where most of the action happens in terms of delay. Is when either there's a light or there's some other interaction with another intersecting roadway. And so the study measures that intersection of Interlaken Road and Route 102. So was there a question there?
No, go ahead.
So the study does find in the Saturday peak hour, and the peak hour is, it's not necessarily the same hour on any given day, but it is the hour where there's the most traffic, and that's what we mean when we say peak hour. And so it's the only time period that was studied where that intersection of 183 and 102 is operating beyond capacity according to the volume to capacity ratio. So that's, 1.01 means it's 101% of the capacity of the roadway is being occupied, which is suboptimal. Level of service goes from E to F. It's kind of like grade school. F is bad. It means it's the sort of the most amount of delay relative. A is you're just breezing through. F is you're kind of stopped. The issue that we kind of come to on these types of things is, the only way to relieve congestion is to take cars off the road. The options to do that are limited in a town like Stockbridge. Again, transit options are kind of not really there. So if you're going to get to the site, you're going to be in your car. We go back to that trade-off conversation. There's a significant number of cars that are going to be coming to and from this site, but they're not all coming at the same time. So you're looking at that number, that kind of bottom line, kind of additional trips is kind of not the best way of looking at traffic impacts. It's really looking at what is the peak hour, because that's where you're gonna feel that impact the most.
Tim,
And
I have a
so-
question.
Yes.
And this is my ignorance of traffic studies. This is a 2-lane entrance into the property. I mean, I'm talking about the actual property, the point of entrance and exit.
So I don't have the site plan up, but I did.
One lane, two directions, one lane each direction. How long does it take 760 cars to exit an event at the end of the event?
I would defer to the applicant on that. So that's, and you're kind of, you're previewing a little bit of my thinking on this very issue, because there's not a, unless, because that intersection is not on site, that is a town or perhaps even a state intersection. The opportunity for the applicant to make changes to that intersection are limited, absent some infrastructure project. And so when we think about what is in the applicant's control, it is on site, and it could be operational, it could be programmatic in terms of when are you scheduling events, how are you managing traffic coming in and out of the site, for the types of events that you're proposing. Because I mean, my read on this is that the traffic is not necessarily being generated by people coming in and out, checking into the hotel. That is something that happens. There may be a little bit of a kind of a burst at 11 o'clock or 11:30 when checkout is, but that Saturday peak hour impact is kind of event based, and the applicant can correct me if I'm wrong about that. And so there's a potential opportunity to mitigate that on site by having a little bit more control and direction and kind of operational kind of policy around how do cars enter and exit this site, so that we can kind of limit the number that are just immediately getting into that intersection. But again, I think generally speaking, and this is relatively objective modeling. It's based on evidence. The impacts from the site are not going to, I'm not going to say they're not noticeable, but it's not going to occupy 101% of these roadways, except at that Saturday peak hour time. And so that's something where I think the applicant should kind of think critically about that and maybe propose some mitigation measures because, otherwise there is going to be more traffic on the roads, but that's just kind of a fact of life when it comes to development. You are densifying the site. And when we talk about trade-offs, if this is the type of use that you want to have on this type of site, it kind of comes with the territory. We do need to look at where those impacts are going to be most acute and kind of most impactful. We've identified at least one kind of point where, there's some potential more work to be done and more analysis to be done.
And Kim, our neighbors like Kripalu or Canyon Ranch, they shuttle guests on vans or little mini buses. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you think about congestion, it's geometry, right? A car is 15 or 20 feet long, and it has, it depends on how many people it has in it. And, the more cars you have with the fewer number of people, the more congestion you have. And so anything you can do to kind of get people, the more people you put into a bus, the fewer cars there are. And the longer that they can wait on site before leaving, the less congestion there is at the time where everyone has a demand to get off the site. And the thing about traffic congestion also is it's not, I don't want to get too far into kind of, math, but it's not linear, it's exponential. And so it doesn't, if you don't need to take 40% of the cars off the road to experience a 40% reduction in congestion. There are kind of dynamics at work here that, the cars, it's about the flow of the vehicles. And so, you don't need to make a bunch of huge changes to make a big difference. But that flow is important. And, it's just like any other pipe or channel or anything else. The more stuff you've got in at the same time, the more it gets clogged up. And so, again, anything that you can do to shuttle people to offsite parking or to, occupy them for 20 minutes, before they leave, after an event, these are all things that can have a big impact. So that was kind of traffic. I think the next, I would say, what I consider to be a major comment would be 35, regarding parking and circulation. We mentioned earlier, there's a bit of an over parking of the site. There is we identify this discrepancy in the counts, and this could be just, I don't know, either typo or we're not reading the plans exactly the same way, but the impact statement says that there's 333 covered spaces for the hotel residences, and those appear to be within the footprint of the new buildings. But the parking counts, when you count up those spaces on the plan itself, it only ends up to 225. So whichever number is accurate, we should identify that and just make sure the plan is reflective of that. The principal building has restaurant space. It's not clear if that's restaurant space kind of exclusive to that building or if it's kind of open to the public restaurant space. If it is exclusive to that building, then, the parking for that space is kind of baked into the parking for the building itself. If that is a open to the public restaurant, similar to the other restaurant, which I believe is kind of open to the public, you need to account for the parking for that restaurant space. And then the final thing is, again, a lot of that parking is shown as kind of within the footprint of the new buildings. It's not clear, and again, this is partially because we don't have section diagrams, we don't have elevation diagrams of the other sides of the building besides the facade. So whether that parking is kind of surface level tucked under the building, whether it is garage space underneath the building, via a ramp, we don't have a clear idea of that. We don't know what the garage doors look like. And so again, this is more information in terms of drawings and diagrams that the applicant can provide to show you know, a little bit greater detail about kind of what that parking looks like, how you get to that parking, you know, how the parking affects the facade and kind of the remainder of the site plan. So that's just some other drawings that we think would go some way towards um, clarifying some of these issues. We have some comments in 41 and 42 about handicap accessible spaces. You know, again, these are kind of technical specifications that just need to be shown um, in a little bit greater detail. Um, Comment number 49 is about loading areas. So, you know, when you've got, you know, restaurant and hotel uses, you've got food coming in, you've got linens coming in and out, you've got other kind of deliveries and loading that happens, you've got guests coming in and out. There are some loading areas shown on the plan, but it would be good to know what types of loading activity is expected in each of those loading areas. Is this loading, and you know, some of it is you can kind of guess from the proximity to different uses. But we do want to know, like, you know, where's the restaurant loading going to happen? Because that has, you know, impacts on, you know, are you going to have a hand truck going across the parking lot? Is it going to be crossing the street? Is it connected directly to the building? You know, we want to know what types of loading activities there are going to be, what kind of trucks we anticipate coming into the site to make sure that the loading is sufficient and is not going to be, you know, it's not going to be blocking other circulation. So just again, more detail on the nature of the loading so that we can make a determination on the sufficiency of those areas, you know, would be important information to have. I think there are, we have a comment number 52 about sort of traffic and circulation for the event space parking in the front. You know, we'll wait and see what the applicant has to say about that. I understand that there may have been some changes to the site plan. I don't want to harp on that if that's something that's going to be a change. But the final comment here, number 53, is the special permit zoning does require in the traffic impact study to address traffic generation during the construction period. Construction period is obviously very different than the kind of ongoing operational period of the project. Different types of vehicles coming in at different times. You know, obviously, if there's cutting and filling and kind of site work, you're going to have, you know, you're going to have dump trucks coming in, cement trucks, construction materials. So that's data that is required by the special permit zoning that the applicant should be providing so that we understand what the traffic impacts during the construction period will be. And I think the final kind of planning comment, I think I talked a lot about this up front, which is section 6.1.2, which is the requirements for extension, reconstruction, or change in use for non-conforming structures and uses. So you know, we talked about this up top, but you know, this speaks to what is the nature of those additions, you know, understanding, you know, does it fit in with the principal building, which is really kind of the point of the whole zoning. You know, does the select board have the authority to you know, to provide this relief, you know, assuming that these are additions. And then I think, you know, the question of the additional buildings, the project doesn't need relief for a change in use. You're allowed to extend, and this section of the bylaw is actually pretty powerful. You know, because it does give the select board a wide discretion to authorize, you know, changes in use, changes in dimensions, extensions of nonconformities. But the project doesn't need the relief for a change in use because the cottage era estate zoning gives them those uses, resort, hotel, open space, restaurant, they get all of that through other zoning. What they need the relief for is the extension of the non-conforming height dimension of the addition, and of the other buildings, which they're proposing at 40 feet. And so again, it's not clear to us that the select board has the discretion to extend that relief to a detached structure that is not considered to be an addition. There's an argument to be made potentially that, we're changing the use from single family house to a resort use, and that requires additional buildings, for these different types of uses. And look, we're not exacerbating, a nonconformity in terms of, anything taller than the principal structure. There's an argument to be made there. But I think under the strictly kind of dimensional extension, if it's not an addition to, because I mean, this is fundamentally what it is. You've got a 40-foot building, and if you extend it, so that the extension is 40 feet, okay. But are you allowed to build a completely separate 40-foot tall building? It's not clear to us that you've got that ability under this section of the bylaw. But again, I think that's something where, the applicant team, has obviously put a lot of thought into this application. Be very interested to hear their thoughts on, on that. And again, this is not, some of these areas are, I know you don't want to hear this, they're gray. And you do have a wide discretion and a wide authority under a lot of these bylaws to approve these types of things. But it's just about kind of being very clear in your decision making. This is where we think we derive this authority from. That kind of gets us into the stormwater comments. I think I kind of, I mentioned up top, I can't really speak in specificity to a lot of these. Simply, we have our engineers that looked at this, and they're unfortunately not here with us tonight. If there are questions on any of these, we can get specific answers. And again, as I stated earlier, if it's in the select board's interest, and the applicant's interest, to kind of work through these together, we can certainly avail ourselves of that and make ourselves available. Because again, one thing that I know about engineering, is that, all of these issues are solvable. You can engineer anything. It comes down to, what are those trade-offs, because a lot of the civil engineering involves site work. It involves, potentially easements, connections to utilities, that have an impact on the site. And so I think, if the applicant has questions about that, we will take them back to the office and make sure we get those answers. But I think a lot of it has to do with, bringing the plans to completion, in a way that is, consistent with the Massachusetts stormwater standards. So that's what I've got for now. I hope, this is all can be very arcane stuff for everybody. So I appreciate everyone's patience. I appreciate all the questions. And again, I think, we say in our introduction that, there's been a lot of progress on the site. We've seen the previous plans. But again, it's just, some of these elements of the zoning need to be cleared up. And a lot of that has to do with some additional materials that would offer some needed clarity. So thank you for all your attention.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Tim. Chuck, do you have any questions?
No.
Patrick, to Tim.
Yeah, I asked him, I think
Okay,
we should look the
Yeah,
applicants.
the applicant's answers.
so then you feel okay to move on?
Well, I don't think we're moving on. I think we're
Well,
here what they were
no, we're
saying.
moving on from Tim.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And we'll go to Attorney
Mhm.
Silverstein and Jim Scalise.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Appreciate the peer reviewers' comments and thorough analysis. Would it be all right if I shared my screen to the presentation?
What? Does anyone want to get up and stretch?
Stretch, yes. 7th inning stretch.
All right.
Got to turn the chairs anyways.
I was gonna say, I gotta call, what's that company? Those audio video.
It's because they're doing more, right?
Do they? All right.
So close, I think.
We gotta figure out this room so people can see the
We need
screen.
another one.
Can we put that in the budget for like, add one last warrant article to get a TV up? Yeah, we need to have both sides. This is crazy.
Right.
Can't see.
Or at least maybe.
That was on the agenda though. I should have talked about it.
No, it's.
Are you ready? Oh, sure, sure.
I'm ready.
Are you ready?
All right.
Are you ready?
Yep.
I'm ready, but I'm fine to wait a minute.
Everyone, we're ready to get started. If I could have order in the room, please. If I could have order in the room, please. Don, that's you.
I mean it too.
Well, I said it 3 times.
All right, is this a good time for me to proceed? For the record, my name is Jonathan Silverstein. I'm the applicant's counsel. And I have a presentation to run through here, and then I'm happy to answer questions at any time from the board. So what I'd like to cover in this presentation is changes we've made to the project, which will address a number of the issues you just heard discussed. And then I'll briefly touch on some aspects of the peer review report. And then I have one slide with a suggested time frame and next steps. So the changes to the project include pretty significant changes to the parking program. There's been a substantial reduction in the total amount of parking. A very substantial reduction in the amount of lawn parking. And a higher percentage of the remaining parking is located in the garages. We've also really enhanced and fleshed out the landscaping and screening program. We've eliminated one building. And we've refined the building design for the hotel condominium, hotel residence building. So this is the prior site plan that we presented at the previous meetings, and that was just the subject of the peer review. This is our new site plan.
Wow.
I'm gonna take you through some of the major changes to the site plan in details, but this is the overall change.
Can you go back a minute? Oh.
So the first thing I want to point out is the change we've made in terms of usage and landscaping in the front lawn. We have eliminated the lawn parking in the front. Both of those areas of lawn parking in front of the front access drive. We've eliminated the wooden fencing, and we've fleshed out some of the landscaping, and I'll get to that in a little bit more detail later in the presentation. We've also changed building placement. One of the things that had been raised at prior hearing sessions is particularly the building to the left, building E of the main, of the mansion. Had been, you'll recall, even with the mansion, relative to the street. You can see that, on the left-hand picture. We have, pushed that building back substantially so that, like the building to the right, it sits back, at a significant offset and keeps the main building front and center. We've also added a lot of screening and walkways, as you can see in the right-hand picture. Primarily, that will screen the street view even further from the street, of the left-hand building from the street. We also, at the request of one of the closest and most affected neighbors, we eliminated the most southerly of the hotel residence buildings, and we replaced it with 3 additional single-family homes. I do want to point out one thing that came relative to what came up. We have, the new program shows the workforce housing units not grouped together. Instead, one of the duplexes is on the north portion of the site and one's on the south portion of the site. You can see those in the,
Okay.
one is
They're like little squares.
yeah, exactly. They have a different color roof line.
Mhm.
So mindful of not clustering them together.
That's this and this?
Right here.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Now, that being said, I heard the suggestion about possibly a contribution. Obviously, I haven't had a chance to talk to my client about it as an alternative. I think that's a very reasonable suggestion, and we could talk about, I'll talk to my client about that, and we can, as appropriate, make a proposal on that. But I did want to point out that they are no longer clustered together. And you can see that a bit in this detail next to the 3 single-family homes that replaced the building we eliminated. We also enhanced the courtyard in the center of the project. As you can see on the left-hand detail, it was primarily parking and some lawn areas. We've really tried to enhance the appeal of it, add amenities such as swimming pools, walkways, gardens. And we've, again, eliminated quite a bit of surface parking, as you can see. So that area sort of in the center of the development is going to be a much more inviting resort style open space. A number of the buildings, again, in order to allow for more garage parking relative to surface parking, we have actually created connections between a number of the buildings that are garage connections. And you can see on the detail on the left, that is showing how cars would enter the structurally connected garage between those 2 areas. There would also be walkways in between. And then on the left, you can see how that works sort of on both sides. You can see on the left-hand side, you can see the garage connection with the driveway leading into it.
So that big thing surrounded by trees is no garage? I mean, not the same big, but the one that's, I'm colorblind. It looks like it's blue to me. Is that right?
It's a pool.
That's a pool.
Oh, that's a pool.
Oh, there's
Yeah, I
a
think
pool.
there's-
Plan for this well.
Where's the parking?
Parking is,
If you look on the left-hand side, if you look at the
See that?
2 buildings that say hotel residences,
Yeah.
and right in between, there's
Is
Okay.
the driveway.
Okay.
the driveway leads to
and they're
the
under.
And then they go
Garage connection.
down the hill. under
So
the
they're
building.
underground.
They're below grade.
Okay, but
Yeah.
they're exposed.
And, Lisa's gonna
And I'll
point
go around
out.
and explain it to everyone else, but like, for example, there's a driveway that enters the building. That's a garage connector. And then you drive in and you go under each building. You can do it over here as well. You see how there's a site driveway that goes into the connector. Okay, and here we have one that goes to both buildings, so they're all connected. And then these two we're gonna do underground. We're gonna connect these two underground. So that's how that'll work. So if I, just to be consistent for everyone here, the site driveway, which is like this lighter color, will enter a building, this building on the end, but in the case where we have two buildings, there's a garage connector between them, which is what Jonathan was explaining. So you drive into that garage door, which is out here. And that's how you measure height in Stockbridge is from the lowest point to the highest point. And this garage connector allows this building to be measured height-wise lower by having this garage door out at the front line of the building. So we meet your requirement there.
So requirement, the 35 foot?
No, the 45 foot, which is the full height. of it. So as you drive in that garage, you can take a right or a left and go under those buildings. And since the last time, at least I was here, we've spent a ton of time with the architect to very carefully lay out these buildings and the parking underneath to get that number.
Has Jim seen this presentation, the PDF of it?
We only just recently received.
Can you email it to him?
No, of course, that's.
No, but I mean, can you do it in real time so he can follow along?
I can see it pretty good
Okay.
on the screen, and I did have a chance to review the slides this afternoon.
Okay.
So yeah.
We also enhanced landscaping and screening, again, so that the most prominent feature when you view the property from the street is going to be the manor house, the restored manor house. So as you can see in this detail, there's going to be a raised earthen berm landscaped on top that's going to provide screening from the street of the new buildings. And this slide in red shows where those berms will be located.
And. Okay,
Can you see?
which is the red? Sorry.
So they're,
This, yeah. Oh, she showed.
Sorry, I'm not left-handed. Here we go. So here,
Okay,
here's the main.
here, and here.
this is where the bumps are. Okay.
Yeah.
This is the main building here.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah.
So obviously,
Looks like
we didn't want to screen
Yeah.
the view to the main house. But the berms will screen much of the rest of it. So we also, as Jim indicated, we've been working with the architect. This is the architectural design of the hotel residence buildings. This happens to be the rectangular building. The L-shaped building will be very comparable, just L-shaped. But again, we're really trying to pick up on stone, the elements of the historic house without trying to make it look too similar, which really wouldn't come off very well. So just a quick overview of what's changed on parking. So as I mentioned, we eliminated a lot of surface parking, moved more parking to the garages. And we eliminated a building, which is why you see fewer total garage spaces, but it's still much higher as a percentage of the total parking program. We had already been considering, but the peer reviewer also recommended considering shared parking essentially, because it's very unlikely that if the entire property is fully utilized and occupied at the same time, so you have 3 events happening, every hotel residence is occupied, every single family home, everybody is home, all at the same time. The fact is that a good chunk of those, of the attendees of those 3 weddings are probably staying on site. So, you know, we were trying to be conservative when we originally calculated the parking demand. And even with that conservative count, we were overparked. We acknowledge it. You know, oftentimes a big concern that's expressed is, hey, you don't have enough parking. So maybe we went a little bit overboard. We have, and Jim, if you're interested in hearing it, Jim has done a shared parking analysis. And we basically picked a number halfway in between what we think is a reasonable shared parking number and what would be required by zoning. And that's where we ended up with the 565 spaces. So it's a reduction of about 220, 217 spaces. So we really have tried to move significantly on that, which has benefits from site design, site layout, enhancing those connections between the buildings. I did want to actually I'll do this. I want to briefly address the peer review report. And the peer reviewer obviously didn't have the benefit of having attended our last hearing. But essentially the peer review comments can be broken down, I think, into zoning interpretation, stormwater design, miscellaneous engineering and site design, and parking. So we've already addressed parking. The miscellaneous engineering and site design issues, for the most part, I don't want to get bogged down now. We've only had about a week or 10 days, but we're going to be submitting a point-by-point response, as is typical when we get a peer review. On the issue of zoning interpretation, you'll recall with the applicant, I was very transparent. First hearing, we said, look, there's some threshold questions of zoning interpretation. We think that the board has the discretion to approve the project as originally proposed. We were told, put an analysis together, get it to town council. We did that. We came in at the next hearing. Town council concurred with our analysis that the board has the authority to approve the project as presented. All of the issues that the peer reviewer raised were addressed in my submission to town council on January 29th, were reviewed and concurred in town council's opinion to you, expressed at the next hearing session. And this board voted specifically to find that on all of these issues, these zoning interpretation issues, which I have to emphasize are matters of law. This is interpreting a law. The applicant's lawyer gave an opinion. Town council gave an opinion, and the board voted. We asked for those threshold issues to be addressed up front because we didn't think it would be fair for us to spend $30,000 on a peer review, tens of thousands of dollars more on going through the permitting redesign process, legal fees, and all of the rest of it, only then to find out at the end, actually, you know what, we don't think we can approve this. That's why we asked. That's why the board voted. From my perspective, these issues are resolved. It's really not, in my view, appropriately within the scope of an engineering peer review. I appreciate the thought that the peer reviewer put into it, but from the applicant's perspective, this is water under the dam. I really don't think it makes sense to
Well, He gets to finish.
I really don't think it makes sense to relitigate questions that have already been discussed at great length. The cases that were referenced were discussed at great length. Other sections of the bylaw that we relied on that weren't noted in the peer review. It was a detailed, thoughtful discussion and the board reached a conclusion. And I would ask that we not revisit those issues.
Right.
Um,
Just comment on that.
yes,
I'm not close to that interpretation. However, a lot of the discussion talks about regarding on the walkways. And there were other points of the bylaws as they relate to the engineering that were specifically touched upon, but you know, I'm not sure it's completely reasonable to suggest that every single one of these discretionary points are necessarily resolved. I mean, I indicated the parking issue with the height of the buildings. I mean, it's not like, this isn't we're not being confrontational or negative, but you know, when the question of the walkways, the height, I think are reasonable. I think that they do raise some other issues around open issues with the zoning, but we can get to that when I get to my questions.
okay, sure. And again, I want to be really clear. The only thing we asked for and that the board agreed to is to determine you have the authority to approve the project as presented. In no way are we taking the position that you have to. This is all a matter of discretion. So I want to be really clear there. But what I don't think is fair at this point in the proceedings is to have to retread ground that we spent an entire hearing session discussing and getting a vote. So that's the only point I want to make. Just, one point that, again, we're not going to go through all the little details in the peer review report now. But one point I did want to raise, and it was touched on in Tim's discussion, is our proposal for a portico share in the front of the building and a front drop. Now, this is going to be a luxury resort. Sending customers all the way around the back to go in the back door is not in keeping with any luxury resort I've ever seen or experienced in my life. And if you look at this photograph from 1892, which shows a front entryway and drive with a portico share, and you look at the rendering of what we're proposing to restore the mansion to, I think we are pretty well adhering to the historical context. We cannot send our guests to the back door.
I know.
So.
Yeah, that's fine.
I don't think you need to.
Fair enough. I did think that was an important point. To the other points made in terms of preserving and enhancing the front lawn area, we actually independently had already eliminated much of the parking, enhanced the landscaping. So I think that's all in keeping with that comment. On the issue of stormwater, and Jim will cover this in some greater detail. The reason we didn't submit 100% designs for the stormwater system is because we had already met with town officials, reached agreement that it didn't make sense to do that at that juncture. The site plan was likely to change, as it has. If we had spent $100,000 on the final design on a project that substantially changed in terms of building location type, that would have made no sense.
This needs to follow all the other stuff, obviously.
Absolutely. And to the question raised by members of the board, I have a very clear answer. How does this get resolved? When does it get resolved? The town has a bylaw that requires a separate stormwater management permit. That's when it gets resolved. We can't get a building permit until we demonstrate compliance. That's what that process is for. Oh, and by the way, we also, as mentioned, have to go to the Conservation Commission. And it's the Conservation Commission for an order of conditions. And it's the Conservation Commission that administers the stormwater management bylaw. So absolutely no issue with a condition requiring us to do what we're already required to do, which is get a stormwater management permit and demonstrate compliance with the Mass Stormwater Act. So, as I mentioned, there are a lot more sort of detailed comments. We haven't had a chance to put together a detailed response to that. We're going to be doing that and submitting it. We think that most of the issues can easily be resolved, if not all the issues. It came in Friday in the afternoon, week before last. Jim was on vacation last week, got back today, or yesterday?
Yes.
Yesterday. So we haven't had a chance to do it. We're gonna do it. We're gonna get it in as quickly as possible. Which brings me to this. So this is our proposal in terms of how to complete this process. We'd love to get your feedback on the changes we've made. Get a sense of, any other, comments you have on the revised site plan. We anticipate, and I think this is conservative, we think we can probably get it in sooner than April 24, the point-by-point response that I mentioned to the engineering and design comments. We would propose that the next hearing date be scheduled for May 1st. At that time, if there are any outstanding questions, we can discuss those. We could discuss proposed conditions. And then our request would be that we have the final hearing session with a vote of the board at a meeting on May 15th. I did want to just very briefly show you one other thing. This isn't showing up for some reason. Maybe I have to stop sharing and then reshare. I'm not the most technically proficient even when I have full use of my right hand. Okay. So this is just a Google Street View of the site. And I think when we're talking about the views from the street, screening, landscaping, and you'll notice that the front page of my proposal was actually a rendering as requested of what the site would look like from the street. But this is what the site actually looks like from the street. So there were some questions. One was, oops, sorry. Okay, one was in terms of the landscaping elements that are in the front yard, what's going to remain? So if you see this orchard, all of these trees here, that's all going to remain. This grove of trees, I believe, is still there. That's all going to remain. And in terms of what you're going to see from the street, imagine in addition to all of this, the raised vegetated berms and additional landscaping that is going to provide substantial screening from the street. When you travel further this way, again, that's going to be the main focus of what you see. The restored manor house. And the raised earthen berms will be on this side as well as significantly more landscaping and screening, which will further help to screen the building, which is going to, again, be set back further from the main house. And the rendering I showed you of the main house, it's going to have that grand entry portico share. We are committed to doing as much as we can to save as much as we can of the building. It's not really a matter of cost so much as structural integrity, and the ability to comply with current codes, given what's there. We may be able to save some or maybe even most of the two side facades as well. And we're going to recreate the roof line, the chimneys. It's going to look like what the rendering we showed you. All of that is a very expensive proposition as compared to just building a new building of our own design on a clear site. So I definitely take your point in terms of preservation and, you know, what's the reasonable give and take. Just bearing in mind that we've already substantially reduced density from prior versions, cluster development. We've tried to eliminate as much surface parking, structured parking under buildings, also very expensive. Construction costs and construction loan rates are exponentially higher than they were when we first proposed the prior project. We're at the risk of divulging attorney-client privilege. All I keep hearing from Pat is, if I can break even on this, I'm happy. This is a passion project for him. This has been his vision for a long time. He wants to see it through. I promise not to interrupt or shut down any of you when you're talking. This is not going to be a huge moneymaker. The last thing I wanted to point out is that in terms of construction traffic, this is going to be phased construction. We're not coming in and building all of these buildings at once. First thing is going to be restoring the mansion, getting it open for business as a hotel. And then the buildings are going to be constructed one by one. The homes are going to be constructed to order. This is not going to be, a fleet of heavy construction vehicles coming in and laying siege to the town. This is going to be a managed phased construction project throughout. And what I would suggest, and what I've done when I've been acting as a board's counsel or an applicant's counsel, very common to require that prior to construction, the applicant provides a construction phasing and traffic management plan. Sits down with police chief, fire chief, DPW, whatever, town administrator, whatever officials you want us to, and walks through the plans. And that's how those issues get resolved. If we need to have details at some time, we'll have details determined by the police chief. And similarly, on that very rare, fully utilized 3 events happening at the same time event that the traffic study, which is a conservative document, when you see that one level of service drop on a peak hour Saturday, which maybe that happens once a year. If we know that's going to happen, we're going to be phasing the events so that everyone's not leaving at once. and we'll go to the town and ask for police details as appropriate. And we're gonna have valet parking. It's not gonna be everyone, it's not gonna be Tanglewood, which, by the way, this site was Tanglewood.
We know.
It's not gonna be Tanglewood where everyone is leaving at exactly the same time. Because a lot of the people are gonna be there for the restaurant, some for one wedding, some for a bar mitzvah, some for, something else, some staying at the hotel. This is not gonna be a situation where everyone's flooding out of the property. So that's my presentation. Jim, did you want to speak to anything more? Or just wait till you.
I just wanted a clarification on the stormwater. Is it generally agreeable that we would be conditioned, should you decide to go that route, with a stormwater review as part of a separate permit? Or is that something I need to roll my sleeves up and give up sleep for the next 2 weeks?
This is an area I know nothing. I'm seeing for myself, and I would prefer to defer to a conversation between you and the peer review and Michael, and not do it tonight.
Okay.
I think it's,
Yeah, sure, fair enough. No, that's the direction I needed, was to understand.
that's my take.
Our
Yeah,
scope.
we don't know. I mean, that's.
Yeah, so I'll talk to.
Because it has to go to conservation eventually.
And as I mentioned, it's your stormwater bylaw is Article 26. And it's a separate dedicated permitting process for exactly that issue. So my suggestion would be a condition that says we can't break ground until we get it.
You can't anyways.
We couldn't anyways, right?
That's right. Yeah, you don't even need it, but you're welcome to have
You
it.
can't anyways.
We don't even need one. We can't.
Let's try to get some questions
The
in
plan
before.
isn't formulated yet to calculate the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, this plan could be converted into construction drawings. It's just it'd be a timing thing, I think. It would take me a couple of months of full-time work to turn. This is a large, complicated project. The peer reviewer reviewed this like it was a set of construction drawings and was pointing out, minor nuances in the plans, which I'm not complaining. It's just, the fact is to raise this to that level is a significant amount of work. And if I have to do that, I think we should flush that out sooner rather than later.
So I'm happy to answer any questions at this point.
Chuck, do you have any questions for them?
At this point, I'm thinking.
Okay. Patrick?
I have a number of questions and I would like to just get them out. We don't necessarily need answers tonight, but especially if they're, I haven't even thought about your timeline. I just saw that tonight. But I think it's important that we start to have kind of the rubber hits the road conversations about what we'd like to see. And I would suggest I have a number of points. So rather than talking about the points, let me make them. I wanted to just address, a lot of folks showed up here tonight and a lot of you seem for, a lot of you seem against. And I think that we need to try not to just view this in a binary. I think that the application did improve, so, actually significantly with the front yard and reduction in buildings and parking spaces. But I don't think we can look at this in a vacuum. I think that even with the existing framework of laws, both at the local and state level, somebody can build 62 units, carve it up into 2 and 4 acre lots and go well up the mountain. Even in the Scenic Mountain Act, you're allowed to clear 5,000 square feet, I believe it is, for a building lot, even within the Scenic Mountain. All right. That doesn't even consider the reality that we face as a country right now. When people tell you what they're going to do, we need to start to believe them. And I'm a Democrat and God love the governor, but she's basically said, she doesn't believe in minimum lot size zoning. That's in these affordable, there's been a lot of publications lately talking about the challenges with minimum lot size zoning. This is in 2 and 4, R2 and R4, all right? So you take out, you take that 62 based on R2 and R4, and it could be, if the state, and God only knows what's going to happen, and we had this debate in the seasonal communities thing, it was like, you can't predict the future, so why should we bother? But there is a risk to being significantly more dense than 62 units. Personally, I'm not ready to make a decision on this, but at the same token, I kind of like smaller and higher end, rather than, an oak and spruce type of model where there's just, ziggurat layer of buildings with parking lots in between it. That's kind of, we don't know what the state landscape is going to look like in even a year or 2 years. And that would argue to kind of be prudent to me. And I'm just pointing out that maybe there is a point for everyone who's going to speak later or at the next meeting or whenever. I would love to hear kind of nuance and not just the sophistry of I'm against this and here's therefore why. We're going to have to figure out how to come together on this. This is a really hard position us to be in. Having said that, here's some of the issues that I would like to talk about. One thing is, look at, this is a town and a region. The average age in Massachusetts is 39 and Stockbridge is pushing 65. People need a place to downsize to. The predominant number of units you propose are 1-bedroom units. When people are downsizing, they might, I think, right? I'm not talking about the private unit. I'm talking about the hotel residents.
We've actually changed that ratio.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Well, then I'll take a chance to look at it.
I don't have the exact numbers, but we have a lot less 1-bedrooms.
All right. I got to ask, is the financing in place? The Elm Court we permitted 10 years ago and it still ain't. It's basically the building is still there and we haven't done anything with it. I frankly, think that part of what and when you say we're hoping we break even, I have no idea the resources behind the applicant.
I can speak to that really quickly
All
if it's
right.
helpful. Elm Court, we looked at the model. It's not a
We
financially
didn't cover
viable
that
model.
part, but I'm just saying,
But-
yeah.
That's why it hasn't been built. That's not an economic project. I mean, anyone who knows Pat knows that he is doing projects, has done projects. He does what he says he's going to do. He's not someone who gets a permit and then either sells it off or sticks it on his pocket. He's gonna move forward if we get an approval, that doesn't have conditions that make the project uneconomic. So, and I don't want to speak for you, Pat, but is that fair?
All right.
And
I mean,
financing isn't gonna be, there are projects all over this region that he's seeing through as we speak.
again, obviously the thing that I think is the most important for us to avoid is a half-finished project. We cannot be in a situation where, and that's why I like the sequencing idea, around, and I want to get to that in a second.
Yeah, and if I could just really quickly, I don't want to interrupt you, but it may be that either it takes a long time or it never happens, that some of these buildings don't get built.
I'll get to that. in a
But-
second. Yeah. I gotta say that it's better density wise, but it is still a very dense project. And I think that if you want this much density up front, that looking at a conservation restriction in the back is going to be important to me. I think that I want to go through this process once. I don't know how long I'm going to be on this board. The whole room's probably going to hate me at the end of this, but I feel like we don't need to figure out phase 2 and phase 3 and phase 4 beyond this. This is fairly dense, but I get the reason for that is because it protects all the other 250 plus acres in the back. That is important to me. I'm just letting you know. Now, if you want to reduce the density on this and leave some opening there, because I know I can't require you to put it in a conservation restriction, I think that we can consider that too. But we've kind of front loaded the density in this unit, and I don't want to get the backloaded density in the back of the property. The reason why this may be acceptable, I believe, is because of in the context of the beautiful scenic views of that mountain and preserving those forever. And that's what a conservation restriction does. So we don't need to deal with that now. I think that's something for you guys to talk about, but I'm just telling you, I think we've got to be stewards of the land. And I think that this is, that some of this land is going to need to be protected. And I think, 10 out of the last 10 sales in Stockbridge are over $1 million. There's going to be increasing pressure to develop stuff around here. And I want the character of the town to stay the way it is. And the way you do that is you don't allow this to be like basically build out all the way up the mountain over the next 20 or 30 years. You put it in a restriction. Sorry for my lecture. I already made the point on the financing and the workforce housing and the screening. I would like to talk just finally, and I'll shut up, about the sequencing. My preference would be to see the sequencing in the following ways. In the first phase, you deal with the preservation of the facades and concurrently the neighbor screening with a really detailed plan on how we ensure both during the construction phase as much as possible and the permanent, the subsequent, that we have screened for light and noise. That is like, basically, I don't see yet a plan for that. I think that the second phase would need to be the main building, like you just indicated. Possibly concurrently, but certainly nothing else. I would like to see the single-family homes in the either concurrent second phase or third phase. So basically, we're prioritizing the single-family homes, the main hotel and restaurants, basically the kind of traditional parts of what we're looking at doing. And then once we've gotten that done, then we start to look at the hotel residence buildings and we look at those, at least most of those last. And I think that we really need a detail on what at least, what we don't want is I get the benefit of phased construction, but like I said, it's a relatively elderly town and I don't want to burden people with 20 years of kind of heavy construction. I live next to the Lindy Center and I'm so happy with how it turned out. But my dog was like, I couldn't get her to walk up the street for 3 years while they were building it because of the boom, boom, boom and all that stuff. And I think we got to basically balance, all of this to understand that there's a quality of life issue with just the constant endless construction if we're doing too much phasing. So I don't know what the answer to this is. I don't build buildings for a living. I'm just raising a concern so that perhaps you can kind of address them at whatever the next meeting is going to be. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Chuck.
Good, Halo.
I'm looking forward to the, when you submit your responses, because that'll answer the questions that I might have that, why be redundant? So, anything else? Pat?
No, I'm good.
Chuck?
No. You can do a good job.
I can send this to you too.
Oh, right. I think Tim's suggestion that we have the ability for Jim to directly communicate with Beals makes a lot of sense, if that's okay with the board.
Yes. Bear with me.
Is that something? So I make a motion that Mr. Scalise can speak to Tim. I can't say his last name. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Your decision. 9 o'clock.
It is late.
What do you think?
I think I summarized what I think. I'd like to hear, I mean, I think there's trade-offs in life and I'm, I spend a lot of time, as I said before, I'm on the housing trust. I spend a lot of time parsing the words of state leaders. And I don't think, look, we had a whole lot of discussion today. It's no secret to anyone. I don't want to get into it, but around preserving a property out in Lake and Cross Road. And there's going to be a lot of pressure to do a whole bunch of development in this town because houses are selling for well over $1 million on average. 10 out of the 10 less sales is my understanding. I think we're going to need to, figure out how we preserve the character of the town while and taking every chance we get to do that. And I like the idea of funding some workforce housing. I don't have any problem with who this development is targeted at in terms of people who visit resorts or live at resorts. I would like to see, the points I raised addressed. So.
All right. And I think your questions will be answered. I don't
Yeah.
think they're going to go answered. But housing and is important. We keep talking about it and that we need it and nationwide. It's not just here in Stockbridge. So, any way we can add to the housing stock. And I don't think it's about money necessarily, that you mentioned something about, it is true, houses are selling for more. But I think it's just people need housing, so they're gonna spend more for housing and materials are more expensive. So, Chuck, do you have anything? Okay. All right, it is almost 9. So if I open public comment, I've given the rules. I ask for civility. You have 2 minutes, and then you're asked to please to end. Please introduce yourself.
I would suggest that we preference folks on Zoom and in the room who did not speak at the prior meetings first. Because I don't think we're going to be at 11 o'clock at night, and I feel like we have some people in the room that I haven't seen before, and I would love to hear from them. So if we could, it's just a suggestion.
Put an ending time too,
What?
ending time. I do gotta work in the morning, people work.
That's a good idea. So, maybe we'll give another 45 minutes. Because then we have to make a date certain and adjourn. So,
I'm not saying that people who've spoken before can't speak again. I would just like to
Right.
hear first from folks.
all right. Is there anyone in the room that hasn't spoken in the last 2 meetings? Okay, sir. You please come up and introduce yourself. And you have what?
I just actually have a ton of questions, but I
We can't answer any questions. You can give a comment, but we cannot
I'll take
answer
notes.
any questions.
I don't know how to do that. I'm listening to my name's David Jamison. I live on Interlaken. And so I'm very concerned about traffic among other things. And I'm delighted to hear that there'll be less parking, but that doesn't mean there'll be less people. And I'm wondering how we stop people parking on the street and screwing up the whole road. If there isn't enough parking, if there's so many people coming. I don't know the answer to that, but that was one of the things that struck me as a concern.
Okay, can't answer. It's public comment.
Well, it's a public question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else that hasn't talked the last 2 meetings that would like to give a comment? Right here, please come up.
How are you?
Lenore Sunberg, 4 Atwick Road. I have lots of questions, but I'll just limit myself to one about the traffic. And this is just a question really for the developer. But it's fine to say what you said about the number of cars and fully attended and all that. But when you think about a weekend in Stockbridge in the months between June and September, when Tanglewood is going on, and the amount of traffic that is on Interlaken Road or Route 183, there will have to be, I think, police. And the amount of traffic leaving one driveway and going out across the street and going north to Tanglewood from that location. I live around the corner from where it is. I'm very familiar with it. I think most of us in this room are. That is a concern. And there's not much you can do about it because the scope of the project is so large, the largest project we've ever had in Stockbridge, that this is, I think I feel like there has to be some sensitivity to the fact that we are concerned for the quality of life in our town. And that amount of traffic and people is I think a legitimate concern. You have every right to do your building as you please, but that's a legitimate concern of our community. And I think it's something that needs to be considered. However that. Thank you.
Hold applause just because it'll take up more time. Anyone else? Don?
Thank you. Don Shave on Lake Drive. I'd like to address something that's very important to a lot of people in town, but has not been brought up, and that is jobs. A lot of people feel that this will be a unique opportunity to have lots of good paying jobs in the community. Statistically, that does not hold true. A full service hotel like what we're planning looks like it'll have about 115 employees. 85% to 90% of these will be hourly. This computes to about 101 hourly and 12 supervisory employees if we have 113 people working there. Hospitality managers
Yes.
in Berkshire County reportedly earn between 53 and 56,000 per year. Hourly employees between about 40,000 per year. This compares with the median household income in Stockbridge of 131,667, with income per capita of 77,750, which is 28% and 48% less than the average Stockbridge per capita income for those who will be working in this hotel. So the idea that this project will provide a living wage level to permit people to live and work in Stockbridge is misinformed, I believe. Additionally, there are 376 currently unfilled hospitality jobs in Berkshire County, representing a significant shortfall. So basically, anybody who wants a job can get one in this industry, and they're readily available. And this project does not offer significantly better jobs for anyone. Now, contractors are a little bit different story. Contractors are split more evenly. They do tend to take.
Until time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Want to speak?
I know, but you did speak at one of the other meetings, I believe.
I haven't spoken at the other meeting.
All right, Dr. Hyman, you may speak.
Those who are attorney. Oh, hi.
Can I have order in the room, please?
My name is Peter Pusilowski. I'm an attorney at Lazan Glover and Pusilowski in Great Barrington, and I represent the Hymans. I think there's a fundamental issue on your ability to approve this plan or anything like it. What we have here is two special permit applications. One is for the cottage bylaw. If you're going to have the benefits of the cottage bylaw, you need to submit to the limitations of that, including height, square footage, et cetera. You have another application here for extension of a non-conforming use whose overt purpose is to eliminate the conditions of this cottage bylaw. It nullifies the first one. It can't be done this way because you can't veto what you're required to maintain under the cottage bylaw by then considering it as a different project and an expansion of a non-conforming use. Furthermore, both of these applications are fiction because there is no remaining cottage to be preserved. What we're talking about is demolition of the cottage and preservation of a facade. There's no cottage to tie this to under the cottage bylaw, and there's no pre-existing structure to tie it to the other permit. What we have here is a Potemkin village, a facade, a movie set. And it is a fiction to say that either of these permit applications are consistent with your zoning bylaw. If your minds are closed to those issues, as Mr. Silverstein has suggested, then I'm sure there'll be other opportunities to discuss them.
Thank you. Laura?
Thank you, guys. I thought that the comments of the peer reviewer were really very important. Mostly when I think about a project, I always think of what is the purpose? What is the purpose? And I think that was really important. And but the other part that he said was what is important to us as a community, and are we getting that or not? And that's, I think, what we really need to do our soul searching on, because the developer has rights, but we also have to make decisions as a community. I thought Patrick's suggestion about when I think that, yes, there are trade-offs, but you can't just think about everything as a trade-off. You have to kind of go back to the core and the purpose. And then when you say, hey, are we getting something? Well, we're trading this and trading that and trading this. And you say, yes, we're going to protect all of this land. That might make sense, but really it has to come back to what is the purpose? What are we trading off? It's not just, well, we can give you this and we can give you this and whatever. I did think that the whole thing about the traffic, the only question that I have is they're only looking at 102 and 183. And really the bottleneck is Hawthorne Street. When Tanglewood is there, and there are delays up to, half an hour, 45 minutes at times. And my question is, there are two things. One is, it's not really a question you can answer, is I know the select board can condition events with nonprofits. And I don't know what it can do in terms of conditioning events with for-profits, with time and things like that. And then the other was to make sure with whatever those permits are, again, with those conditions, that there's some kind of enforcement or penalty provisions of that, because otherwise, what's the point if there's a way to really kind of say this is what has to be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll say. Good. All right. Seeing no other hands, anyone on Zoom that hasn't spoken? Mary?
Hi. Yes, thank you. I think Patrick's financing question is apt. One of the most troubling parts of this project, really to me, is traffic at the events. The resort places are really expensive to maintain after they're built. There's a lot of money just into the financing of not just building the project, but maintaining it. In order to make ends meet, more and more events will probably have to happen. And that just really turns this beautiful residential area into, Route 7 in a commercial zone. And that's not what it is. And that is not what it should turn into. So I think it's really important that we see both the financing and the financial model for running this hotel and in the entire area. And, I just also want to point out that, because of that increase in traffic, there's no sidewalks. 183 is already a very narrow road. It is, those of us who walk, those of us who try to ride our bikes, it's really already not a safe place. And adding that traffic, adding alcohol on the busiest days in the summer when people are trying to have their own summer who live here is really problematic to me. And there's a safety issue there beyond just the number of cars that I want us to think about. There is not that level of people consuming and partying and things like that that's happening now. So that's going to go up. And lastly, I may have missed it, but you showed in your revised plan 0 turf parking spaces, which was nice to see, but your deck then calls for 163 spaces. So I would love to know where you're putting them. And I just want to commend Laura on her comments. Thank you.
Mary, what's your last name? Who's speaking?
Mary Carey Coley.
Oh, okay.
Anyone else on Zoom? Seeing none, Anyone in the first row? Josh?
Josh Payer on 62 Interlake Road. Peak Tanglewood traffic must be captured, road fully analyzed, large concerts do not disperse. They will travel in lines. Would you like to be in this line of traffic at 10, 11 o'clock with someone who says, gee, there's the drive at a 98-degree angle. You will kill somebody. You will jolt the traffic. Route 183 is not a state highway. It's a municipal roadway. Beals wanted to know where the water was going off their 500-foot driveway. This is where it goes. It goes into the road. There's no drainage. The engineers figured that out in Boston. This is why you need a real road study, capturing Tanglewood and everything. The Vanderbilt mansion was literally collapsing onto its roof from the brick chimneys had crumbled and fallen through the roof. That was Chris Ersfeld's comments. That's why you have this bylaw. They got Elm Court. Professional planner Joe Russell said in bylaw was financially feasible for cottage properties. This is what the town is supposed to get. Houses and drive 7 feet below the roadway level, you'll kill somebody. If I turn one way and they go the other way, we lock the roadway up. Did the engineers address this? Nobody's addressing. The neighbors need to be addressed here. We need to be able to talk at these meetings for more than 2 minutes. The housing, do you pour gasoline on a fire? You're going to put a resort in the middle of a residential zone and the investors are not going to come in and suck all those houses out. This is way more than Church Street and a lot of these other streets all together. This is about affordable housing. You will strip the residents out and we will push and pay for everybody. Sidewalks, you might as well take a plow down 183. What a mess.
Dental time,
We will pay for this.
dental time,
Then we will get taxed out of the town
dental time.
and dragged down a rabbit hole.
Thank you. Thank you. Second row. Third row. Fourth row. Fifth row. Sixth row. And last row. Seems done. All right. Thank you all for commenting. What?
So
I know I am. So we need to, do we, follow the, sorry, April 24th to get our feedback, and our next meeting certain is May 1st.
I'll make a motion.
When is
Keep
the
those
next
names.
meeting?
Just a second. And I'll second, and all in favor?
Wait. I thought it was April, what, May 1st?
Yeah,
All right.
all in favor?
Aye,
Of the meeting May 1st.
Yes.
Yes, aye.
Aye.
and the 24th,
And
February 24th.
February?
Wasn't it?
no, May 15th.
Okay.
Oh, no, I don't think we can vote on that till after the
We'll
first.
just do May 1st.
First,
So do I have a motion to adjourn?
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.